In the following 30 minutes, I'd like to talk about agriculture and productivity, increasing agricultural inputs, and I'll try to cover three theses. First of all, despite all progress in yield over past century, farmers do not generate more profit. Farmers are caught in a game on productivity increase and forced, non-voluntary, to use all available options. The second thesis is that the agricultural inputs of chemical industry, fertilizer and crop protection chemicals have been successful as they sustainably increased productivity. Since 1995, however, innovative seed has a core role in the productivity increase for crop production and has replaced crop protection as the dominating innovation platform. And the third thesis is that the development of genetics will drive seeds further to remain the main innovation platform going forward. As you realize, I will only talk about agriculture as crop production and leave animal production out. Furthermore, innovation will not be discussed broadly, but only for selected topics. Well, yield increase in crop production over past century are impressive. Shown here for corn, one of the most important global crops. Long-term data are easily accessible from the US and used here as an example. The development is very similar in all important crops like wheat, soybean, rapeseed, cotton, sunflower, and in all regions of this world. So let's take corn as pars pro toto. Corn yield level of 19th century stayed constant until the 30s. Then, of course, the American values. These are the bushels per acre that you see here on the chart. But most critical technologies were synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, and they increased it, of course. So we had in the 1920s that, then we had the hybrid plant varieties, very important for corn, and then that was since the 30s, and since the 60s, the herbicides, in other words, to control weeds. And then since the mid-1990s, introduction of transgenic insect-resistant corn varieties. These are heavily discussed GMOs, the genetically modified organism, meaning those plants hold one or more genes, mostly originating from bacteria. These genes produce proteins which reliably protect corn plants from insect damage. Europe de facto prohibits production of such GMO plants, on which we see fierce disputes here. And this chart shall indicate the concurrence of technologies as established. Technologies don't disappear when a new one shows up. However, one technology at a time drives progress fastest. And that is the one that we normally refer to as the platform technology. Do we see an end of this yield development? Up to now, it doesn't look like that. On-farm field trials beat the US average of approximately 200 bushels per acre by more than double yields. We do not actually see the end of the productivity potential. On the other hand, you'll notice, look at the years from 88 and 2012. These are marked here on the chart. They give you a feeling how climate change can impact the outcome. Of course, price per unit of grain is the second parameter impacting farm economy next to yield. The graph shows the development of most important agricultural commodities over the past 110 years. Obviously, prices of the three most important commodities are fluctuating in harmony, namely downwards. We can see the peaks at the two world wars in the 70s because of poor yields and political set-aside programs to reduce cropping area. And then again, 2009 to 2013, due to several poor harvests. Apart from that, the price erosion is surprisingly constant over such a long period. And agricultural products are voluminous and must be collected close to production sites to be marketed globally. We all know the large elevators of the local cooperatives built for this purpose. However, the local co-ops are small players despite regional and national collaboration. Estimated 75 to 80% of global trade is realized by 5 companies. They're the ones that run the show. That's market leader Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, Bunge and Dreyfus as established players, and the Chinese company Kofco has now joined this very select group. Farmers, and you see that here in the chart, they are called the ABC. It's easy to remember. A for Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, Dreyfus. So you see there is that farmers face a global oligopoly to sell their crops. Market powers are clearly distributed. Also, the following steps of the value chain down to supermarkets are structured by an oligopolistic way. Even mild price pressure executed by consumers is boosted in this system and pushes grower prices down towards production costs and even down to marginal cost of best producers if commodity supply is perceived to be sufficient. Today, U.S. corn price is around $3.25 per bushel, at average production cost on rented land of $4. So, these prices do not cover the average production costs. So farmers are forced to utilize all productivity tools at hand. Since decades, use of productivity increasing agricultural inputs is an option, as mentioned earlier on. If an innovative product is really productivity increasing, fast market penetration is achieved. So you here see the first GMO traits in the US, and the blue line shows you with herbicide-tolerant soy, it reached more than 75%. And we're talking about seeds. So there's only one selling process. You can only sell it once a year. And farmers are very conservative buyers. With corn, it took a little bit longer. Look at the green and the red curve. And that is because corn is very complicated and it has a very difficult structure. That's why it cannot react as fast as with soybeans. And again, driven by the productivity progresses that we were seeing because of the GMOs. So, if you wonder why it's only 75%, it doesn't go further up, the red line, well, we have the so-called herd immunity. If 75% of the plants are resistant, then those cannot then increase and become more populous, and therefore the entire area is slightly protected. Such a drive towards increased productivity is a global trend in agriculture, however, on a region-specific level. The next slide may appear a bit complicated in first view, but it is interesting to have a closer look at it. With the exception of the former Soviet Union, that you see in pink, and it moves back and forth, the other countries are different. You see a continuous productivity increase in all areas. In the developed areas, this is the flat curve, Asia, Korea, North America, Europe. On the horizontal, you see work productivity, and in the developing countries, you have a more pronounced increase, as in Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. There is a progress in area productivity. And you see the level of subsidies in Asia compared to Europe, but this is not a true indicator for the overall agricultural subsidies. So the impact of market powers is clearly visible in global agriculture. Without doubt, that is positive for every one of us, addressing our spending to buy food and for an effective use of production factors in crop production. However, one of these production factors is our environment, with attributes like climate, soil fertility, sustainability, or biodiversity, which, failing monetary valuation, are ignored in short-term economic optimization. That results in problems. Iowa has perfect conditions to grow corn and soybean, and grows today almost exclusively corn and soybean, demonstrated in green and yellow in this slide. This is a picture from the year 2000. It hasn't changed. And anybody ever driving through that area will remember it. It's a desert of corn and soy. County Pocahontas, 40 times 40 kilometers. So whatever is in yellow is green today and the other way around tomorrow. So biodiversity is different. Such one-sided cropping system leads to problems with soil erosion, of course, and also specific plant diseases and pests have best options to propagate. There is a price to be paid for high productivity. Sustainability can, in fact, collide with short-term optimization. Economic pressure does not automatically lead to better solutions. But let's go back to the important ag inputs of today. Fertilizers, mainly nitrogen fertilizer, still are of eminent importance. The products themselves are generic. Substantial progress comes from intelligent application. Precision agriculture techniques divide a large field into single square meters, which are individually treated according to need. Up to 30% savings are possible without yield reduction. But it requires expensive further mechanization, driving larger fields and less crops. Chemical crop protection has been driving progress since the 1960s by reduction of yield losses and by improved production methods based on better weed control. Since the mid-90s, the GMO varieties are core to productivity increase. Constant variety improvement by breeding plus GMO-based herbicide tolerance and insect resistance have driven high productivity increase. Looking at the market prognosis reveals an overproportional growth of seed markets compared to a slow-growing crop protection market that you see down there in the very solid columns. In addition, herbicide-tolerant seed drives herbicide application and hence determines about 1/3 of the herbicide market. Seed remains the dominating platform in the coming decade. More than 50% of the total market, as indicated by the bracket, will be driven by seed. The ag input industry has reacted to the situation. The race for further and further improved crop protection products resulted in high R&D costs. Innovative power of chemistry was slowly slipping over the past 30 years and had already forced an intensive concentration process. But the fast 4 years saw the 6 largest players grow together by M&A projects worth billions. A similar concentration process reduced the number of globally acting generic players in the same period. The second driving force behind the remarkable concentration is the need to be competent in chemistry as well as in seeds. Successful development of a new herbicide without seed competence, equaling herbicide-tolerant crops, is hardly possible today. All R&D-driven crop protection companies are active in seeds after this last round of concentration and hold the number 1 to 4 positions in ag chemistry, but also in seed markets.
For farmers, this means to also face a global oligopoly on the side of core input providers. Market powers are clearly distributed here as well. A productivity-driving innovation will be priced at the value of its biological efficacy, as long as it's protected by patents, and resulting in value share with farmers. This mechanism is also very attractive for its GMO traits. The seed production is basically the same whether with GMO or without. Plants produce the additional gene by themselves and pass the valuable property on to all progeny. Once patents expire and similar products compete, then the market mechanism drives prices down on both sides from the farmers as well. The farmer remains caught between the oligopolies. Farmers have only limited room for maneuver here. Consumers want healthy, sustainable, ecologically acceptable products, but they generally buy according to price. Politicians react on emotionalized consumer products by introducing product bans, technology bans, but don't tackle the global competitive structures driving the dilemma. Market forces driving progress, there's no doubt about that. Markets are the driving force behind the high productivity of today's agriculture. But it could be said that market orientation is unlikely to provide the desired long-term results. A reasonable, sustainability-oriented regulatory framework is necessary. Unfortunately, the second point is not so good currently in Europe. Let me point out the de facto ban on GMO crops. And both decisions were, I think, not based on scientific, but based on emotional ground. A core question does, however, remain. Which technologies and platforms will dominate markets in the future? In terms of innovation, there are two alternative views. One group wants to save the planet by further increases in productivity, and the others want to save the planet by way of healthier, more sustainable, more locally produced organic food. And I'm sure you are aware of these two groups and how unconciliatory the discussion is. So what's the right answer? Both wings have to learn from each other. Ever-increasing productivity is not an option. On the other hand, the organic camp cannot ignore the global demand for food and return to nostalgic production methods. Additional area usage as a consequence of low yields is also not a reasonable option. Production costs in vertical farm, in this case of salad, is tenfold higher than that of field-grown salad. This difference requires a new business systems, and without which there is no future. I believe that the production of global commodities like corn, and soya and wheat won't change fundamentally, and it will remain a game for the highest productivity. And that affects up to 80% of agricultural areas. Fruits and vegetables are also driven by attributes like appearance, taste, lack of residues, regionality, etc. Here, the borders between conventional and organic production are pretty blurred already today. New business systems, like direct deliveries to specific restaurants, may allow innovative production methods, but whether that works in times of crisis, well, that's an open question. Back to innovations right now. I believe that genetics will be the most innovative platform, and that applies to both camps. Seeds remain the leading innovation driver. GMO products will not disappear from corn or cotton. They will retain a high degree of utilization and will remain in a stable and dynamic, steady market, but not in Europe. Genetics is the science behind the seed property, and that will mean we will get better types of plant, whether they're GMO or not GMO. I'll give you now a couple of developments which I think will have the highest impact. The first is the CRISPR system. This allows targeted changes to the genome in exactly defined places, just like in Word, and you can change specific letters. That's a mutation, as we've always used in plant breeding for more than 100 years now. But the precision of the CRISPR method represents the new opportunity. The application of the method does require a very deep understanding of how exactly these attractive properties are coded in the genome and which changes can be used to drive success. So this knowledge does not exceed its out of small areas, and it'll take a while before we see new products there. The second is sequencing or genotyping. The costs will fall, so we can look at not only types of crop or even organisms, but even varieties of a crop. Unfortunately, this generates huge amounts of data. In the case of a wheat genome, that's 16 giga base pairs. 16 billion base pairs. Yeah, in terms of books, that's the equivalent of 4,000 Bibles. Up to 65 IKEA Billy bookshelves full of books. So we need to look at other differing properties. The next I want to mention is metagenomics. Decreasing sequencing costs allow fundamentally new iron seeds here. 1 gram of soil, 1 cubic centimeter of soil contains 10 million microorganisms from 20,000 different species, of which only a few hundred are known. If you now sequence the entire DNA of such a sample, all genomes could be restructured in a computation. So we would know the genome of a species before we actually know the species. This opens the door to the huge diversity of microbes and their microbial metabolism. Even today we use bacterial genes, encoded proteins as well, also, for example, using the CRISPR method. And what we expect from this is a multitude of genes for pesticide control, for corn, etc., and to improve insect control. But I think these will also benefit areas outside of agriculture. I want to mention artificial intelligence again. DNA can be seen as a language with 4 letters, which is very close to the digital language we use for IT. The big potential here is the use of AI for the analysis of genetic information. And I'll give you an example from practical plant breeding. In plant breeding, we use a simplified method. We don't sequence every single line, but we determine 10 to 20,000 genomic data points. That's enough for normal plant breeding and costs about €10 per line. maybe 15 euros. It takes a few days to get that data record. And what do you do with the information? What you do is you try and use that genotypization to help to improve the performance of the new breeding lines. This competes with field trials, which cost $200 per line, and doesn't take a week, but takes a year. So this obviously opens up significant cost savings and will drive forward innovative capacity. This slide shows a comparison of established methods against AI algorithms. You can see the correlation vertically from the calculated yield performance with the real tested performance. That's the horizontal line. The left-hand side shows the limited correlation, but what you can see is a sort of a cloud dots, and I'm not actually learning a lot from that slide, I must admit. But on the right-hand side, thanks to the algorithm and the AI, you can see the important green points, and you can see that the points are actually on one line, and the correlation, and that gives you correlation values which are very important for the breeder, and that really does give a choice of lines which could go into the field tests, and also opens up new breeding processes in which rare properties can be combined economically. Let me summarize that by saying that for the large acre crops, the soya and wheat, and I don't think that the productivity gains will be huge compared with today. It will still be balancing, seeking the right productivity. In terms of specialty crops, we need to changes in business model changes as well. And I'm absolutely convinced that seeds will remain the fastest growing segment and the dominant platform for the next 10 years. And just one final comment. Digital applications are obviously important within breeding and without. Robotics, for example, automated agricultural machinery. That we're talking about automation. That's very important. It's also lucrative, but it's not absolutely lucrative. It only becomes very interesting when automation enables better farming methods, agricultural methods. So maybe the large fields in monocultures may be mixed with other plants which benefit each other. And so we can use small robots to work the fields economically, and that might open up new, attractive, innovative agricultural systems in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. A bit of applause from our side of the room. So we'd like to join you in a question and round session. I've got a few sessions lined up, questions lined up for you. And don't forget, people watching, you can use the chat function and send us your questions. I get them on board, and then I can put them forward. So we've got some good questions already lined up here. Food, what will the effects of the productivity you've mentioned, what kind of, can they be measured on the human organism? Good question. If you have a productivity increase, a product brought into the market, it's gone through a very deep scientific test, and without passing that test, it won't be launched in the market. There's been a toxicological test. Is it dangerous? Are there risks? And also the ecological aspect. Is it a product which is dangerous for the environment? And both of these aspects are checked, and only if the results are positive can that be launched in the marketplace. So it's a very intensive scientific check on all productivity enhancing methods and are necessary for the agricultural industry. Every country has its own institutes for that purpose, and government offices, government registered offices. For example, in Germany there's the Biological Federation Institute in Braunschweig. In the US it's the EPA and the FDA. It takes 3 or 4 years at least before you've gone through the procedure, and then the run up to that you've generally got 8 or 9 or 10 years of study time before you've even got the documents available in order to pass that on to the EPA. So it's a very, very in-depth examination and test. I've got no doubts at all that food is secure, and the steps we've heard about, they're very much comprehensive. So, but when you look around, what kind of damage are we causing here? As an economist, how can we cover the costs for these seed? We're destroying diversity through these oligopolies and these monopolies. And is there a mechanism there which says what determines the price, or is the price bonus for the natural products? Is that what two different price ranges, price classes? The natural factors which one uses as a farmer, one knows they are not for free. They have a monetary value. And there are, for example, products which produce more CO2, they would be disadvantageous, and other methods which save CO2 emissions. That is the way we have to go in order to stop this abuse, exploitation of the natural world. Because if it's cheap, destroying the planet, the environment is cheap. That's why we have to have some way of reflecting a monetary value on, that CO2 is a problem. How can you put that as a price factor in agriculture? And if you have that, then you can use soil to store CO2, and you can and then when you release that CO2, that needs to be included in any calculations one makes. So pricing of the environment, which is not for free. At the moment it's for free, but we realize now that nothing is for free. I think that there is this massive change taking place in people's mindsets, and we've learned how to deal without plastic bags when we're shopping. We've learned to think about where it's sourced from, what is organic, what isn't organic. You might not believe it every time. In the meantime, German shops have so much organic stuff. It's difficult to believe it is all bio, and not everyone can afford these organic prices, these bio prices. We need cheap food for everyone, to feed everybody. There's quickly a problem here. Between 2009 and 2013, there was a peak in pricing that in Europe, that's not a problem. We've got so much money, we can afford it easily. Whether the price of corn or maize goes up a little bit, that's no problem. But in Mexico, in Burma, where the world is different, people in Mexico, there have been riots, or at least unrest, because people couldn't afford to buy their corn, their maize anymore. So in the West, we have a very privileged position in the world, and we should not. My opinion is we can't simply halve our production because of organic reasons, and then just because there's lower yields, we simply buy that product somewhere else. One has to keep the world in view, have the global view, and there's no way of getting around that. Something that's very interesting for us. We've looked at various procedures. You've presented various methods. This genetic manipulation, CRISPR, is not much loved by people who think genetics are a problem. Are the other methods better because you're not directly manipulating the genome? Are there other ways of manipulating productivity? Normal plant breeding works very well. It's not like you don't have to use these genetic methods, and one has to continue using those traditional methods. They are very effective. But I think what one has to do now is we have to be careful about becoming too ideological. There are solutions we need to look at. And GMO products are subject to massive discussions at the moment. They are a very hot topic, despite all criticism about the availability because of the limited number of companies involved. But they can be a virtue because they reduce the level of pesticides one needs. So one needs to look very carefully at how one can use the processes in order to solve the problem. And that should be the approach that one adopts. There are so many innovations available on the microbial side. It was also been mentioned today, because we are slowly understanding how important microbes are on the root surface of these the plants we use. Obviously, we're talking about microbes here, and so you can't see them immediately. You need a microscopic system, and that is a new field which will play a big role in the future. Talking about key criteria: sustainability, climate change, and investments in the agricultural sector. Maybe we invited Mr. Krafft to talk about investments. Look in Israel, there's a company looking at trying to for cranberry production, where the insecticides are very specifically applied. There's ecobotics near Geneva. They look at the field, and that is automated weed control. Is very, very tailored. So we've got the major players, the big companies, and then we've got the KWS, a local company in Germany, a seed producer, and we've got the startups. Where in this big field does the KWS have a chance against the big players? Is there room for startups? Is there room for investment? New technology, if it's going to help productivity, that's always a winner. Where productivity can be enhanced, then that is a safe investment. But it takes a long time before that can be launched in the marketplace, because the agricultural business is, it's an annual process. It's a conservative players. The farmers are conservative. Lots has changed in the last 30 years. It really has. But it's quite often very difficult to get this kind of technology transferred into an actual product in agriculture. This bridge has to be taken, and it's a very long and difficult bridge. That's why the big players are the ones who have that bridge in place. They are R&D driven, they say, but they are actually marketing and sales driven. They have the global sales system, distribution system, which no one else has available. What about the...
No, we have questions here from the vegetarians and the vegans asking, why is it that meat is so much cheaper than other products, and couldn't we change completely to other things and getting away from meat? Yeah, we know that, of course, that to get a pound of beef, you need a lot of plants, you need a lot of water, not to even mention the methane. Beyond meat now is the big thing in the States. That's something positive, to get away from our natural beef production. Nothing wrong with that. But the question is, how do you want to manage meat production and improve it or retain it, whatever? I think it would be good to change to wheat-based products. I personally would not buy any pork for 20 cents a kilogram. I mean, it's expensive. So who is responsible for this oligopoly? You know, in the past there was the farmer The farmer is stuck. I mean, who is basically responsible? Is it only the consumer? Who can actually bring about a change? Well, the consumer, per definition, will always go by price. Nobody's going to buy milk just because it's more expensive. Very few people would do that. This price pressure will not go away. I'm skeptical that there is going to be a change in attitude by the consumer. But you have to see if alternative production methods may get us to have a real change. Pricing, taxing the products may be a way of doing it, but then you're close to the limits of what you can do, because it is a very complex issue. That's a problem. A few professors believe, Mr. Beck writes, that today you do have enough food for 10 billion people. The question is the distribution. Absolutely, distribution is a problem. But if you have, of course, if you're sitting in Burma and you need rice, you can't just go to the world market and buy 2 kilograms of rice. You have to have access. I was in London in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and there was a food exhibition, and there was a show called Waste. And since, we don't like empty shelves, we want shelves to be filled, even though we know that a good percentage, maybe up to 30%, is going to be thrown away. And 30% don't even leave the farm because they are not in accordance with EU regulations. Well, it depends on what country you're in. If you are in developed countries, we are the big wasters. We are the ones who throw things away the moment they are one day past the best before date. In the developing countries, it's different. There, the losses are that the wheat or whatever is being produced, but then cannot be shipped away from the farm because they don't have any place where to store it. So the post-harvest loss is major in those countries. Here in Europe, it's mostly the consumer who likes to throw things away.